Well, you might look at that title and you'll see it differs from the one in the book and the one in the notice. There's been a bit of moving of the goalposts as we put the paper together. Basically, the committee of the Update organisation wanted the subsoil manuring story from Victoria for you guys. Bring it across to South Australia, tell you what we've been doing, the ins and outs, the highs and the lows. And then they wanted me, Bill, I think, isn't it? Bill, to talk about drier country. You know, is it a possibility? Well, let me just say, Bill, I don't know about that. We're doing work, but we haven't. This wasn't a good year to do it last year. So I'll look at the issues when I get to that stage. Our research team, most of us are at Trobe, and Renick, Peries from Depi and Geelong. That of course has changed now to a new configuration. I think it's, what is it, business management, economic development, resources, and goodness knows everything. No agriculture. But anyway, that's that. What I'm going to be talking about is a little bit about the process, the problems, the results in terms of crop yield and water use. We're going to touch on the economics because that's a big issue with this. The need for spring rainfall, and then we'll talk about whether it might be possible to be applied in dry country. This work began, I might go over here. This work began in 2004. We were approached by farmers in the high rainfall zone who said that they are not getting decent crop yields because they run out of water in the spring because the roots can't get into the subsoil. It's dense, very little porosity, macro porosity, for the roots to breathe, for air to diffuse. Density, they're very strong and they're dense. Very low infiltration rate, water movement, and generally highly sodic. Most of our soils are over 20% in the subsoil, over 50 to 60% clay, and macroporosity less than 10, which is the magic number to get root growth. The problem is widespread. We are the driest continent. We are the most sodic continent. I've been spending a bit of time in Asia looking for dense sodic clay subsoils, and I can't find them up there. They have other similar problems with physically constrained soils, but not with the soils like Australia. And of course, you can sort of see where our wheat belt is. We've got a lot of this sort of problem. Unique pedological history, I suppose. It's just what's happened to our continent over time. Let me just take you through the process. It is a major intervention, as the name implies. We've been tending to operate around about the 30 to 40 centimetres, which in the soils that we've dealt with are more or less the top of the B horizon, where it turns highly, where the clay layer becomes hard and dense and more sodic. So we rip, preferably in the dry autumn, between crops. We want it dry. We want that ripper to go in and we want it to shatter and create fracture lines to sort of get a little bit of movement into the clay matrix. We don't want to go in when it's wet and smear it. We want it opening a bit. And then we put in high rates of manure. Now, when we started, we picked 20 tonnes. Fresh weight is a good number, good round number. And lo and behold, all of our workers more or less said that you need higher rates like that. We started with pellets, poultry manure pellets, dynamic lifter, loosened pellets because they would flow quite nicely down. We had to do it manually. We've since moved to poultry litter on the broiler sheds. You guys know, use a lot of it here. And it's sort of, depending what base they use, it's impregnated with excreta from the birds, and we found it to be as effective as loosened pellets. So it's good because it's much cheaper, and a lot of it, there's a lot of available manure around, or litter around. So that's what we end up after the process, 2 rip lines, about 80 centimetres, a metre apart, sitting in the top of the clay. And then what we do, we just let the farmer grow the crop, and we have these small plots, and we go and measure crop performance, yield in those plots. Then, of course, the farmer sows hopefully a cereal. We prefer the cereal. And the aim is to get root proliferation around those rip lines and between the rip lines. And so we're relying on enhanced root activity in that clay to do the change. We call it the transformation. And yes, what we need, of course, is we want good winter rain, or good start, good rain, but particularly we want a spring rain. We need that spring rain to drive crop growth, to drive root growth in that layer. In terms about transformation, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about changing that dense, chunky clay into almost an aggregated topsoil. And this was taken 4 years after treatment. The change actually occurs with the first crop, and all these physical parameters change, but it seems to be long-lasting. After 4 years, that's what we see. And so we more than double the macro porosity, which is the large transmission pore, because of all the aggregation. The roots can now breathe, less waterlogging, lower bulk density, the roots penetrate readily, rapid infiltration, almost a 50-fold increase in the hydraulic conductivity in that soil matrix. So we can get the water in very quickly. And then the question remains, what about the sodium? 20% ESP plus, what happens to the sodium? Well, I'm not sure what happens to the sodium, but I'm not really concerned, because really sodium's about, sodic soils in my book are about low porosity, and if we've got porosity, we don't have a problem, unless there's toxic sodium, and that doesn't seem to be the case. So that's what we're on about. How does it occur? Again, a lot of this stuff we do not know the complete utter biology of it. We don't know it. But reading the literature, this is the sort of best bet picture of what is happening. We've got the manure, the litter, the poultry litter, and we've got roots. And both of them drive microbial activity. And a lot of these microbes, or a number of these microbes, produce extracellular polysaccharides, the long stringy molecules that seem to act as glue for the clay particles, and there we think is where we get the aggregates from. And you can see that once we get the aggregates, we've got the pores. So that's what that's what happens. Let's see how that extrapolates through to crop yield. The statement in the notes is large, consistent, continuing crop yields. The first crop we got in 2005 was a long season red wheat. It was a fair average season. Rain at the end in November. And it just seemed to really benefit this treatment, because the crop seemed to hang on, and then we got late rain, and it really kicked on. But when we looked at the yields, we had a bit of trouble with this, and in terms of coming to grips with them, because we didn't think this would happen. But the control and the deep ripping and the gypsum and the MOP were around about the 7 to 8 tonnes, and these two straight dynamic lifter and the loosened pellets around about the 13 tonnes per hectare at Baland, dry land, whereas the best they've ever done is about 6 or 7 tonnes. And 30,000 kernels per square metre. Amazing. We grew a crop of wheat. The next year was 2006. Remember the drought year in 2006? Complete empty spring. But there was summer rain. Now, we thought when we grew this crop, we monitored soil water, and we just noted that the subsoil was now powder dry, absolutely dry as a bone. And we thought, well, we're not going to grow another crop on this because we've used all the subsoil water. It's all gone. What's going to happen next year? We won't do very, very well at all. However, what happened in 2006 was the summer rain in January and February, I think. There was quite a few rainfall events that went straight in, down into that dry subsoil, and we got an extra, I think, 2.5 tonnes of wheat in the drought year, based on that subsoil water that we captured early on. Following year, a yield response. Third year, the project came to an end. We grew canola again, produced a nice, 60% yield response. Then after some time, GRDC came to the party and funded some sites across the high rainfall zone in Victoria. And to sort of summarise the picture there, I'll look at all of them together. We'll average them out. We had 11 site-by-season combinations of cereals, wheat and barley between 2005 and 2012. It could have been a first-year crop or a second-year crop or a third-year crop or a fourth-year crop. So I pulled them all together and basically they were fairly consistent. They were all giving us 2+ tonnes extra of cereal, 2, 3, 4 tonnes. The average commercial crop, 5.6. The average subsoil manure crop of 9 tonnes per hectare, which this sort of fairly consistent response of around about 60% yield increase per crop per year. And we do it in year 1 and then we do nothing, we just leave it. And then we get a second crop and a third crop and a fourth crop. We've now gone 5 crops in one site and we're still getting the response. But I think that will come to an end because I think we're running out of nutrient now down there. Yeah. So what we're finding, okay, look at 2012. Now, in 2012, this was the year that I really was quite convinced that there was something in this. If you look at the Penshurst site, now Penshurst's an interesting one. When we set this site up, Jaikirat, who was the guy in the field, came back and he says, I don't think it's going to work at Penshurst. It's a pretty good clay. I mean, it's not very hostile, it's not very difficult, but it worked very well at Penshurst. In the fourth crop, this is the 4th consecutive crop, we got an extra 2 tonnes of canola. Derrenellum was the 4th crop, an extra 4 tonnes of wheat. And then the 2 sites in northeast Victoria, an extra 4+ tonnes. And then the one site that we had a pulse was favour beans at Whitcliffe. This was the 3rd year site. And he got an extra 2.7 tonnes per hectare. And the farmer was very proud because he was saying, well, he got $490 in the paddock per tonne. So you can sort of see what the numbers look like. Now, one of the things we've noted, every time we do get the responses, we're monitoring soil water, we're getting extraction of deep subsoil water, which we wouldn't get before. And just to show you, this is the loss of subsoil water between flowering and maturity. Post-anthesis, between 50 and 100 centimetres. So we're talking about a fair way down now. After anthesis. And you know, when you look at all the crop physiologists, they talk about how can we get water use post-anthesis, because that's when it's very efficient. And that really helps to finish off the crop. And if you just look at all these sites, you can see the loss of subsoil water in the control and in the subsoil manured plots, and all apart from Whitcliffe were significant. These are pretty noisy numbers because they're differences between 2 readings for each crop comparison. But nevertheless, they're indicative that we are noting this deep water response, this deep subsoil water use. Now, in 2012 we got these results, but perhaps the jewel in the crowns was this measurement, where we said to GRDC we will get plant available water, we will try and measure that. And so we set up 2 plots, control and subsoil manured, and we went through the process of putting up rain shelters at the end to let it dry right out, to get the dry, and then we put the drippers on to fill it up again. If you look at the plant available water, 0 to 40, very little difference, 98, 102, but there was a huge difference in the subsoil. works out about 78 millimetres extra water holding capacity, between 40 and 100 in this instance. And that's a lot of subsoil water that is going to be pretty useful for the crop. Now, this is the other side to it. You'd imagine if we're putting in 20 tonnes of poultry litter, which is 45 cubic metres of poultry litter in rip lines at 30 to 40 centimetres, we're going to spend a few dollars, aren't we? Well, we certainly are. We thought initially, we did our sums and we said we thought we could do this for about $500 a hectare. And then a little bit later we said, no, we better increase a little bit, $750. Well, what did it all come to? We did a very detailed analysis of the results at Penshurst and Derrenellum over 4 crops. And we looked at the inputs, we looked at the outputs, and we did a partial budget. So extra cost, extra return, and looked at it. And when it came to, well, I guess the analysis is, we said that, well, this is what would have happened if these farmers had have invested in subsoil manuring in 2009. This is what would have happened in terms of extra returns or extra losses over this time period. Well, at Penshurst, it wasn't $750, it was $1,345 a hectare. They had to cart the manure 260 kilometres. They had to buy it at a pretty good rate, I might add. It's probably higher now. They had to handle it. They had to sort of put it through sieves to get it into the machine. So it was $900 odd, $800 at Derrenellum because of the closer distance for freight. If you look at the total, that's almost 60%, two-thirds almost, of the cost is in getting the amendment, carting it and putting it and getting it ready for the machine. The costs on the machine were based on purchasing a tractor and amortising it and depreciating and doing the works. I worked with Bill Malcolm from Melbourne Uni on this, and he's a bit of a whiz in farm management economics. We based it on a machine that was being built and was actually doing broadacre stuff. You might have seen it on YouTube or the GRDC site. It was an early manifestation. It was costing, we said, $440 to incorporate. Part of the problem was the machine had to go so slowly to deliver a high rate into the rip line. It was going half a hectare an hour. They've worked on this and they've increased that 6-fold. They're now doing 3 hectares an hour. So immediately that's going to lower the cost of that. Okay, so look, the costs are high. The reality though is that it's still very profitable. If you look at the returns with, the extra returns and the extra costs with Penshurst, year 1, of course, you've got the big expenditure, and then each year you've got extra grain that you've got to carry and store and handle. So there's some more extra costs there. The extra yields, we documented the wheat and canola, the extra benefit from the extra yield, and then the net benefit. At Penshurst, you can see we were still almost $600 per hectare in the red after the first crop, but we had paid for it by the second crop, and the last few crops were looking very profitable. What was the investment worth in terms of investment sort of parameters, you might say? Investing $1,345 in 2009. The term that they use is net present value, which is the quantum amount that investment is worth in 2009 dollars, over and above an investment of 8%. So the first question is it going to be positive? Is it going to exceed 8% return? And the next question is, what is the size? What is the amount? And the amount worked out over 4 years was $1,800 a hectare. So that was the net increase in wealth over 4 years for that investment, over and above 8%, or annuity of per year of $550 almost. I think that's marginal internal rate of return of 76%. And Bill had trouble with this calculation. And the problem was that he didn't believe it, and he spent weeks trying to find fault with it, but eventually he had to accept the fact that we were getting these big yield responses in the latter years. So there we have it. We became pretty confident in this technology because every time we did it, it worked. We did it in 2005, and then we did it in 2009 and 10 and 11 and 12 and 13. Admittedly, these were small plots, hand harvested, except for Jaikirat in 2013, which was canola, a 30-hectare paddock. And I don't want to sort of give anything away, but I think it's fair to say if you go past Jaikirat, you'll see a lot of activity. They virtually paid for the investment, and of course it was costing them a little less because they bought in bulk. They almost paid for the investment in 1 year, and I think the plan is to do 1,000 hectares now, based on that. So it's a good story, and this was written in, this was mid-January. And I went overseas, and when I came back, there was some phone calls, because what we learned is that if you have a good year, you can make the transformation of the clay, but if you don't have a good year, you can't do it. You need that rain, that spring rain. And unfortunately, in 2014, there were a whole series of, well, there's 4 in fact, that I can put my fingers on where they'd gone in with this amendment, and it didn't work. In fact, some sites, you got a yield depression because you're putting in high rates of fairly nitrogen-rich amendment, and they were getting big yield response, and then they ran out of water because there was no spring. And you could just look at all the rain, look at the rainfall, look at the response, and there was just no rain. And there was negative response. So that's a bit of a sobering thought. 2014, dry spring, not going to work in that year. Now, maybe all is not lost because you've still got the rip line sitting there in the dry subsoil. Maybe 2015 we'll see some transformation, maybe. Yeah, mate, sure. So, no spring rain, no deep proliferation, no subsoil transformation. Now, let's just look at this, this question of can it be extended into the dry country. I don't know the answer to that. As I say, we're trying to get the answers. We'll know probably next year a little bit better, but you've got to have enough rain to open up that subsoil. You've got to get good spring rain to drive the roots to do the transformation, and then of course you've got to fill the bucket. So you've got to create the bucket and then you've got to fill it. And if you don't have enough rain, both of those tasks will be problematic. So I'm just taking the view here that, look, I don't think it's going to work in dry country, and for these reasons. A, there's just not enough rain to actually make the bucket and to fill it. I'm worried about the subsoil constraints, the chemical constraints that you find more in the drier country. I know up in the Mallee there's a lot of subsoil salinity, alkalinity, boron, and these sorts of issues. Are they going to upset the microbes that actually do the job? They are sensitive, the microbes, to salinity, so we're not sure. And of course the other problem in the dry country is you're a long way from broiler sheds, particularly if you're going to use a poultry litter, and the freight will make it exorbitant. So that's on the negative side. There's another point of view though, a positive view which says that look, it will work, or it might work, or it could work. What we're planning to do is to do a whole series of more research projects looking at making it more cost effective. We've got to sort of try and get the cost down, make it more farmer friendly. It's so daunting at present. It is very daunting to put in 45 cubic metres it is. Now, if we're going to try a whole range of new innovative ideas, and we can hopefully get the transformation in a less daunting process. If that's the case, we don't have to make such big profits, and therefore it might apply. It might be profitable in the dry country. But of course, It might also be very good because if we get that open clay, we might be able to pick up, any time you get a big rainfall event coming through the dry country, you're going to pick it up in that subsoil. We could see how the subsoil is recharging when we got rainfall events in sort of late winter, early spring. And it just kept on filling up and then it started to dry down. So it is a very efficient profile in terms of capture. So that may help. And the final one is the chemical strengths may not limit. Depends where the salt is. If it's down deep, maybe that's not the problem. We can get the roots working in the top. Maybe, we're not sure how the water, the actual water comes up from below, that the whole of that clay dries right down. Is it a concentration gradient that is set up and the water moves up? Or do roots have to go down to get it? We don't know that. We'll be looking at that this year. So, look, the answer is it's an open case. It remains to be seen. Work in progress. I wouldn't give up hope if I was in the 400, 500 millimetre country. I wouldn't. But look, let's just wait and see. I am aware that a lot of activity in South Australia is going on with deep placement, and I'm keen to learn about those experiences. So if there's anybody in this room that is working with clients, innovative farmers that are doing interesting things, getting results, positive, negative, please let's know about it, eh? And it'll help us, because then together we can sort of see where this fits in. So on that note, Matt, I'll call it to an end, eh?